Kindertransport Survivor Artists on Film, a conversation with film director Melissa Hacker. I hope you were all able to watch her award-winning film My Knees Were Jumping, Remembering the Kindertransports. The streaming link will be open until tomorrow night. I'm Rachel Stern, Executive Director of the Fritz Ascher Society for Persecuted, Ostracized, and Banned Art based in New York. I'm honored to introduce Melissa Hacker, who is the daughter of a Kindertransport survivor from Vienna, Austria, and the Executive Director of the Kindertransport Association. Melissa is a filmmaker who made her directing debut with the documentary My Knees Were Jumping, Remembering the Kindertransports, which was shortlisted for Academy Award nomination and shown worldwide. Honors received for Ex Libris, A Life in Book Plates. Melissa's current work in progress include a Fulbright Artist in Residence Award in Vienna and residencies at Yaddo, VCCA, Playa, Villapa, Bay Air, Solston, Millay, and the Laba Laboratory for Jewish Culture, LABA. Melissa has spoken internationally on the Kindertransports, consulted on exhibits including Rescuing Children on the Brink of War, created at the Center for Jewish History in New York, and opening at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum in September 2025, and Without a Home, Kindertransports from Vienna at the Vienna Jewish Museum. Melissa is the editor of 2 Academy Award nominated documentary films, A Wandering Professor, most recently in Yangon, Myanmar, and serves on the governing board of the World Federation of Jewish Holocaust Survivors and Descendants. After our conversation, there will be time for Q&A, so please post your questions. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you, Rachel. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. And I thank everyone for joining us here. So first, because I know that not everyone has seen the film, My Knees Were Jumping, Remembering the Kindertransports yet, I'll show a trailer. It's just 2 minutes. So those of you who've seen it, we'll just have to be patient for a minute, and then we will start our conversation.
In the 9 months leading up to World War II, nearly 10,000 children from Nazi Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland were sent to safety in England. My mother was one of these children.
The day he was brought back, there were 2 men with him, and I heard the second man calling up and in effect saying something about, shall we take him in again? And I knew instinctively if he ever were taken back again, he'd never come out. And I think it was that which made my parents decide to send me away.
All of us, including the children, had a very clear sense of absolute danger, of the malice of the world around us.
I thought, this was an adventure and I would go and my parents would follow with no big deal. And that's how we went into this, a little afraid, but sort of also feeling that it was an adventure, we were going to something better.
And now you've seen both Lori and my mother.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Melissa. This is an amazing introduction and start of our conversation. So, what was your introduction to like when did you learn about the Kindertransport?
So yeah, I'll answer in a sort of long way is I grew up in New York, and my mother shared fragments of her life as a Jewish child in Vienna with us from when I was very young. And I knew my grandfather died when I was 3, so I don't remember him. But my mother and grandmother spoke German to each other. So I knew my mother was different than other American mothers, but I she wanted us to know what had happened so we would be prepared when the world fell apart again. But she didn't tell us specifics. It was kind of bits and pieces that I couldn't put together. And I didn't think or realize that I was growing up in a Holocaust survivor family until Helen Epstein's groundbreaking book on the second generation children of the Holocaust was excerpted in the Sunday New York Times Magazine. And I remember I was, I don't know, maybe 12, running across the apartment into my mother's bedroom and jumping on her bed, waving this magazine, saying, look, look, we're not the only people like this. And then my mother started talking to me a little bit. I learned more, for example, that my mother always had Viennese friends, but I learned that they too had Holocaust stories. At some point, I paid attention to the family photograph albums, and we were very lucky to have photograph albums. I know people who don't have any at all. Erica Estes, who was in the film briefly in the trailer, she has just 2 photographs. But my grandparents were able to send out lifts or trunks from Vienna, some of which were stolen directly from the shipping agency, many by the Austrian National Library, which is the subject of my next film, but some made it to New York. And there are some photographs in there of family members. I didn't know I had this huge family. There's this huge Romanian family. And then there are the photographs with red crayon scrawled over them in German saying, my brother murdered in Auschwitz, which was my grandfather's writing about his brother Sigmund. And I later learned my mother's cousin Polly, who was 5 years old, who was murdered in Auschwitz. And he, like many more children than were saved by the Kindertransports, did not escape on the Kindertransports. But it wasn't really until I was in college that I learned about that my mother wasn't the only child sent alone, that it was an organized rescue movement that we now know as the Kindertransports.
Mm-hmm. Wow, this is amazing. So, like, once you started learning about your mother's story, did she also start opening up to your? Did you ask questions first of all? Because I mean, that will be the first step, right?
Yes, but at first, no, because there's such this thing between the generations, and it's one of the things that's wonderful about the third generation is that they don't have this. We have this overprotecting thing that we're protecting our parents because we don't want to hurt them. And they are protecting us because they don't want to hurt us. And also because they don't want to tell us something that we won't be able to hear in the right way. I mean, what teenager has the capacity to listen to what their parents are telling them about their life and about something really terrible that happened to them? So it wasn't, I went to college, I dropped out of college. I went back to college and fell in love with film. And so I had moved from New York to Seattle. I moved back to New York, and I was at NYU, New York University, in the film school, studying with George Stoney, who was a brilliant documentary filmmaker and teacher. He made a film about Flaherty of Nanook of the North fame, how the myth was made. And he was a developer of public access television. So I thought, like any college kid thinks, oh, I'll make a film about something I know. I'll make a short film about my mother. She's different. She has an accent. She has all these fears. She overcame, I wouldn't say overcame, but she had all these fears. She had this accent. She had a different life, and she made a very successful career for herself as a costume designer. So I thought this would be interesting. Let me learn more about my mother. I'll make a little 7-minute film. So it was only then that I started doing research. I learned, and then I learned about the Kindertransports that took close to 10,000 children to mostly Jewish children to the United Kingdom. And years later, I also learned that smaller numbers of children went to Switzerland, France, Sweden, the Netherlands, and even the United States. So then I realized that I wanted to tell not just my mother's story, but the wider story of the Kindertransports, because I would ask people, and no one then had heard of the Kindertransports. And there was one unpublished doctoral thesis, and there was Lore Segal's book, Other People's Houses, which was out of print. And that's a fictionalized memoir that is beautiful. That's about her time as a child in Austria and then in England and the Dominican Republic, but really tells a Kindertransport story. And my mother had a copy of that. So I read that. I started doing research. And also at that time, the Kindertransport, this was in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. The word Kindertransport wasn't really in the lexicon. It wasn't in dictionaries. And it's just children's transport. It's a translation from German. But they hadn't even started getting together themselves. Like children who had been in a hostel or Grick Castle in Wales or Mill Isle Farm in Northern Ireland had gotten together over the years. But it wasn't until the 50th anniversary of the Kindertransports in 88, 89, that Bertha Leverton, who was a kind living in London from Munich, said, let's get together. It's the 50th anniversary. Let's get together. Not only the children I was in a hostel with, but everyone who escaped Nazi Europe as a child. And so over 1,000 people turned up to this reunion that she organized in London. And I missed that because I wasn't aware yet. But some kinder from New York went to that, and it changed their lives. And also, they found their people they knew in New York, but they had never talked about the fact that they had each been on a Kindertransport. So Eddie Berendt, who was from Danzig, came back to New York and said he wanted to found an organization that didn't just have reunions, but didn't just have reunions, also educated and gave back. So the KTA, which he founded, Kindertransport Association, has this threefold mission: to educate about the Kindertransports as this part of Holocaust history, to connect Kindertransport survivors and the next generations, and to advocate for and support children at risk, especially child refugees without parents today. And they were planning their first reunion in late 1990, and I heard about it. And as part of my research, I like followed the threads from, oh, look, there was the reunion in London. Oh, and then there's something happening in New York. And I asked my mother if she'd be interested in speaking at this. And then I reached out to Lore Segal. I cold called Lore Segal because back in the day, there were physical phone books and the white pages, and her phone number was in the physical phone book. And I had read my mother's copy of Other People's Houses, and they had not met exactly. They had met, according to my mother, she and Lore Segal had met at a party in the 1950s. And my mother was so excited to meet Lore because she had read an excerpt from Other People's Houses in the New Yorker. And my mother's memory of this was that she went up to Lore at this party and started to say, we have something similar in common or whatever. And she felt that Lore rebuffed her. And she was super hurt by this. When they finally met at the reunion, where I had arranged for both of them to speak, of course, Lore was mortified and had no memory of this bad party incident. And they did become fast friends for the, unfortunately, very short remainder of my mother's life. And so, yeah, back to, I knew I couldn't make a film then just about my mother. So I wanted to make a film that intertwined my mother's story, the Kindertransport history, and also how it affected the Kindertransport survivors their whole lives and how it affected the second generation. And I thought it was really important to show this rescue mission where people from far away helped because they took action. And I thought this could be an important inspiration for viewers to think, what can I do? How can I help? And this is not something that has gone away, the need to help people seeking refuge.
Mm-hmm. That's for sure. But I also think you came in at a point when it feels that the Kindertransport survivors were starting being ready to be more open about it because their children were at an age where they maybe did ask questions, and there was this 50-year distance. So I'm just wondering. I mean, you have spoken with so many of the survivors. Did they see themselves as Holocaust survivors, or did they what was their self perception?
So, yeah, in addition to all the interviews I did for the film, and I mean, that's a whole saga in itself because I was actually making this film on film, which is very expensive. So I did audio interviews, many, many people before deciding on the ones on film to film. I've also done a lot of oral history interviews for the Kindertransport Association. But yes, another reason I wanted to make the film was that I learned from my mother and so many others that I interviewed, they didn't consider themselves Holocaust survivors. They felt they were the lucky ones, that nothing really happened to them. It was their parents, it was the children who didn't get out. So that they had really nothing to say and they weren't part of that community. And I felt, of course, yes, they were lucky. They were saved. They were rescued by strangers. Many people were not. But something had happened to them and they had been cut off from their childhoods. And in many cases, their families had been murdered. So I really wanted to try to get through that and have them be part of the Holocaust survivor community. Yes, they're different from concentration camp survivors. That's for sure, but they are survivors. And I wanted to really make that clear. Also, yes, I think the thing was, in the 50s, when concentration camp survivors started speaking, people didn't want to hear what they had to say. And they stopped talking. And the Kindertransport survivors, like child survivors, have a similar trajectory. They didn't speak because in some cases, their parents who had survived were like, you don't remember this. You were young, for all sorts of complicated reasons. And so it wasn't until the 50th and gearing up into that people started to speak. Not so much children asking, although in some places, because I know I heard in interviews I did for the film, many stories that people told me they had never told before. Erica Estes, I only learned 2 years ago at her Shiva that being interviewed for the film completely changed her life. That after the film, she started speaking publicly and speaking in schools and going back to Hamburg and speaking to schools there. And that was something she hadn't done before. So yes, I think it was the timing was in their lives when they are ready to start thinking about what they had gone through with the time of distance and reflecting it. It was good timing. They hadn't told the stories again and again, because often you'll see people tell stories with the same exact words again and again because it's very fixed and it can be dangerous to try to think deeper than the fixed recitation.
Right. And I think another big aspect is also that right after 45, the main focus for the survivors was to build their lives and to build their lives, and there was no reflection, there was no trauma awareness or trauma research. I mean, that I think there was simply not the time there for that. Over the past many years, I mean, there has been the awareness and so much research into the effects of trauma on the brain, on the next generations, and so on. That I think that also allowed the survivors to accept their pain and their memories. Do you feel like that had an effect on your mother as well, or?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I agree to a certain extent. Yes, that's certainly true. And also that the Kindertransport survivors, like other child survivors, were trying to make new lives for themselves and then raise children without parents themselves. So Erica talks in the film about she wanted them all to be good Americans, and she couldn't imagine they would be affected. I spoke, and there's differences between those who settled in different countries.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I was showing the film in London, someone who said to me, "Oh, this is American. This is ridiculous. And here we don't, we don't talk about that. My son, he lives in Boston. He's not affected. He doesn't think about this. You Americans, And so I was like, okay, when he's in Boston, do you think he's going to be in Boston on this date when my film is going to be showing at a festival there?" And she said, "Yes." Yeah, so can you ask him to come see it? So she did, to her credit, she did. And Be Green, this I'm remembering. And he came, and I said, "I have a question to ask you. Your mom says that you haven't been affected by this at all." And he just burst out laughing. So that miscommunication between the generations, and also it's their story. I mean, one of the ways the film is that's really beautiful that it's been used is to open up discussions between the generations and things that have been hidden not only in survivor families, but other families too. Early on, I went with a friend when it was showing in Los Angeles, and her husband was a poet from Beijing.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend thought he wouldn't want to come, he wouldn't be interested. But at a certain point in the film, he started weeping. And he explained to me afterwards that his parents had suffered terribly in the Cultural Revolution, and they had never talked about it. He knew it happened, but they'd never spoken. And so after seeing the film, he was determined next time he went back to Beijing to start asking them about it. So, trauma runs deep in all sorts of families. And yes, back then, my mother went to therapy in the 60s, and she felt it never really helped her because I'm sure they didn't know. I mean, I think to find someone who knew how to deal with survivors, who knew what it was to even start to approach it, and especially the stuff going on with women and psychoanalysis in the 50s and 60s, I think you would have to be very lucky to get help that way.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. And, I'm just wondering, like, both your mother and Lore Segal picked creative careers for themselves. And I'm just wondering whether that decision was involved, had to do with their past or with their past experiences.
I mean, if you think about it in one way, both Lore wrote as a writer. She wrote these letters when she was in England, these really moving letters, trying to find metaphors like the rose and the snow to get people to help get her parents outside of Vienna. So she used her writing for her parents' survival. My mother, could draw, and she used her drawing for her own survival, in that in school in England, when she didn't understand maths or science, she would draw, but she could draw. She would draw the dissections and draw beautiful flower all the lab drawings for other girls, and then they would do her maths homework. So in some cases, it both came from survival, and then, maybe it's something that you can take up in an insecure world, because you can write and you can paint. My mother also studied with Hans Hofmann and modeled for Hans Hofmann before she became a costume designer. But these are careers that you can do anywhere. They're not set in a place. So if you think the world is uncertain, I'm not, but it's just now occurred to me that this is something they both used already in England.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it didn't involve language, which they had grown up in a different language and in the different cultures. So yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit more about your mother? She has her 100th birthday coming up. So
yeah.
So that's very exciting. So
yeah. So my mother, very sadly, my mother was just 65 when she died, and so much of her work is older work. But she first, when she came to New York during the war with her parents, England had a program where they allowed people who had their visas to the US but didn't have their ship passage yet to get out. So my grandparents, and I just want to point out, because I think this is important, my grandmother and my mother could have gone to America to my grandfather's sisters in 1938 because they were on the Austrian quota to the US. My grandfather, who was born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, he was under the Polish quota. And so he was waiting for his number to come up to the US, and my grandmother refused to leave without him. And so they found the Kindertransports and sent my mother to England. And then luckily his number came up, but they didn't have ship passage, but England allowed them to come. And they couldn't live with my mother there, but they were all safe. And then just a month before the US entered the war, they came to New York. And my grandmother, who had not ever worked, was taking in knitting piecework, and my mother was drawing Popeye cartoons. And there was a Fleischer studio in New York, and drawing greeting cards to help support her family. So she was doing art very early on, and then went to Cooper Union, which was free education. But then still had to drop out to work. She found a mentor. And the family lore is that she was torn between costume design and set design, but the union test for costume design was cheaper. I don't know if that's really true, but she became a costume designer. She started working in opera and dance in New York. And then New York in the 1960s and 70s was a really vibrant filmmaking community. So she worked with Arthur Penn on The Miracle Worker, which was first a play and then a film. And she was nominated for an Academy Award for black and white. Then they had two categories, black and white and color. And I do regret that she didn't do Bonnie and Clyde because she didn't want to take us all to Mexico. But there are two things that I regret in her choices, that and Apocalypse Now. Coppola wanted her to do Apocalypse Now. And yes, in reality, she probably made the right choice, because there's a documentary his wife made about the making of Apocalypse Now, and it was kind of a nightmare. I mean, a big nightmare. But for kids, I think it would have been super fun. But anyway, she did, and I tried. There was a point where she was choosing between Annie Hall and I think it was Chelsea Girls, an Andy Warhol film, and I was really rooting for her to take the Chelsea Girls, but luckily she did not listen to me, and she took Annie Hall. So she worked. She was a working single mother after my parents got divorced in New York. She only started working on films in Los Angeles once we were in high school, and she felt okay commuting, leaving us with random young actresses. But it was fine. All was fine. And then she worked more and more. She did One from the Heart, which is kind of beautiful, but she died in an era before costume designers were really known, because costume design was traditionally more of a sort of, it was gay men and women who were not in the higher ranks in Hollywood who did costume design. You've heard maybe of Adrian, who did gowns in the 20s and 30s, and Edith Head, who I remember once I was on a lot in LA with my mother, and she pointed and said, look, that's Edith Head on her little golf cart tooling around the studio. So my mother is seen by a costume design historian as a link between the old studio system and the new independent cinema. So it is her 100th year, and we are doing a commemoration in March at the Center for Jewish History in New York, which will also be live streamed with panelists, really recognizing her work, which hasn't been recognized. And Taxi Driver also. And we've just found we have these great production Polaroids from Tootsie, showing Dustin Hoffman in various stages of transforming into Dorothy, is the name of the character. So it was my sister's idea, actually, and it comes from Lore. Also, we were at Lore's memorial at the Center for Jewish History, and my sister turned to me at one point, because that was a really beautiful event, and I think that's available to see online also. But my sister turned to me at one point and said, hey, it's going to be our mom's 100th year. Can we do something? So, yeah.
Beautiful. And so how did Lore's professional career develop? Like from writing these letters, trying to bring her parents over to England. There's it seems to be a very big jump to becoming this widely acclaimed writer and author.
Yeah, so I think, and then she went from England to the Dominican Republic, and then eventually to New York. And I think she wasn't widely acclaimed for a long time. And I think for a long time, she was a working writer, also raising her 2 kids. Her husband died quite young. And she was a working writer and a writing teacher. I've heard from people who were in her workshops for years who loved her. And so she was teaching and writing, and then connected with the New Yorker, which is a fabulous for any writer, and had her stories and excerpts of her book published in the New Yorker. And really, My First American is a really important novel of hers. It's really beautiful. And she just kept at it and went in and out of fashion. I mean, Other People's Houses was out of print for years. And then, came back in print. And then as there was sort of a vogue for memoirs, it was published as a fictionalized memoir, which she fairly much objected to and only sort of conceded late that, okay, I'll have it. She's like, it's definitely not a memoir, but I will accept it being thought of as a fictionalized memoir. And I have to say also at the Center for Jewish History, there's going to be an exhibit on Lore from January 22nd to the middle of April. So I'm really thrilled that both of these women are going to be in the Center for Jewish History at the same time. And I think also Beatrice and I are going to be doing her daughter Beatrice, some speaking together, which we haven't done in years. There was a time when My Knees Were Jumping was first out that I was traveling with it for a long time, and I would often do it. It was great when I was doing discussions after the film with people in the film. So
fabulous. So there's yes.
Sorry, no, you go.
So there's a lot to look forward to, and of course we'll share with our audience all these events and make that public. So Melissa, you've brought us a film that is not published at all and will not be part of the recording. So this is a very special treat for us. Thank you so much. I'm really excited.
Okay, thank you. So this is it's called 256,000 Miles from Home. And I just want to say, I had not planned to make another film about the Kindertransports. I had done that, but through sort of indirect, wayward circumstances, this film came to me, and I'm really happy that I made it, although it was a beast to do it. So hold on to your hats for a minute. I'm going to find it and share it. And it's just 15 minutes long.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Melissa, for sharing this new film with us. And of course, now the question is, how can people see it? Where can they get access to this film after today?
That's a fine question. It's sort of the blight of distribution of short films. So the one thing I can say is, if you want to be in touch, the easiest way to reach me is at melissa@kindertransport.org. And I can do the usual of collecting people's emails, and then when there are screenings, let everybody know. So, yeah. And I thank people for the interest.
That's fabulous. I mean, what's really very special about this short film is to see people reflecting on their experience, on how strong these early childhood memories, some of them being hugged by the grandmother at bedtime, and the wisdom that the father shared upon separation, how strongly they carried through people through their lives, and I find that very very touching, and also like how. Yeah, I'm always touched to see how different the experiences can be, and the individual experiences. And somebody is asking here what the name was of the person who worked at NASA, who listened to his father.
Ralph Malarick. That was Ralph Malarick. Yeah, I mean, what you said before about the time of interviewing people, this is like almost 30 years later, when they're all in their late 80s and 90s. So the way they're looking at things is different, but that it's still, I mean, Ralph, he's this analytical engineer at NASA. He worked on the Hubble telescope, also on glass, grinding glass somehow. But he is just so in tune with his emotions. I mean, in his talk at Parliament, he had everybody weeping. And he would admit it happened late in life. I mean, I think he regrets some of the ways that he was a very strict father and not being able to be in touch with his emotions until later in life.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're just all there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it feels a little bit that like every parent, they too were trying to prepare their children for life, right? And some might have decided to make them strong and independent, raise them as strong and independent people, and others might have decided to drown their children in love. So I think that's a very and David is actually saying here, your family's experience was atypical. I think my mother went to England in January 1929 alone. She went from foster home to foster home. Some families were kind to her, most were not. At 14, she was required to leave school and work in a factory where she made uniforms for the Home Guard, and her foster family took virtually all of her pay. It wasn't until she met my father, himself a survivor, although too old for the Kindertransport, that she began to have a life. Yeah.
I mean, Kindertransport, and this is another, from being such a little known rescue effort. In Britain, it's much more widely known. And for a long time, every country has its Holocaust mythology. Austria, for example, as the first victim of those bad Nazis that came from Germany, and Austria had nothing to do with them. And then Britain, they built up this mythology of the Kindertransports as this wonderful thing. And yes, it was a wonderful rescue effort, but Robert Sugar, who was at Mill Isle, a farm in Northern Ireland, he said to me at one point, he said, why were we not an army of children marching through Trafalgar Square saying, get our parents out? I mean, it was a sort of rhetorical question. He knew that would never have been possible. But a choice was made to separate children from their parents and to save the children only. And it was done in haste. It was done in great haste because initially the children came in. If they had individual sponsors, people who said, I will be responsible for this child and vouch for them, they went straight to meet them. If they didn't, they went to these summer camps. It was winter. And in order to keep the pipeline flowing of children, they had to get them out of the summer camps. So houses were found for them in haste. So yes, some children were taken in as maids, some as farm workers, and were not allowed to finish their education. Some were abused physically and or sexually and were not believed because they were refugee children. And if, for example, a vicar took them and two little German boys said, this isn't okay, and the vicar said, what are you talking about? Who would be believed? So it was certainly mixed. It did save their lives. And in many cases, it was also at that time, it was thought that individual foster families would be better. But it turns out, in retrospect, that when they were in, and I just, there's a comment from someone who knew Sonny and Eddie better, who I always refer to as the gold people because they're dressed in gold in the film, who were in Grit Castle in Wales. I can't find it now. But children who were together with other refugee children could relate to each other and support each other in a way that children who were alone in foster families couldn't. And my mother even spoke about how she was sent to an upper middle class foster family for Jewish holidays because somehow the committee thought that would be good for her. But for her, it reminded her of her parents who she missed, and it made it even harder. So, you spoke earlier about lack of trauma-affected care. Certainly in the 50s, certainly, in war or just before war, that they managed to get this together was amazing, but it was quick and it wasn't deep care in many cases. And
Yeah, and also Britain entered the war, which changed things, the atmosphere again. But maybe we should backpedal a little bit and kind of Melissa, maybe you want to share like how not only that the Kindertransports were put together in haste, but also from different countries. Children were brought in different ways and different routes. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because it feels like when you hear Kindertransport, it feels like this one train that went back and forth and was always filled with kids, but it was very different from that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk a little about that. So many people know Amy Williams, who's a historian who has worked with the KTA, who is finding records. We knew that there were records, but we imagined they were scattered all over the world. And she was able to find a large cache of them at Yad Vashem. And so she's starting to do work to really parse out more how the Kindertransports were organized. And and there's someone, he's also second generation, his mother, Paul Wiedling, who was a maths professor in England. He was the first to really go into the archives in Vienna to learn how the Kindertransports were organized from Vienna. So yes, so the bulk of them were from Germany and Austria, and the children would travel from the outskirts in many cases to join a train in Vienna or in Berlin, or a ship. Some went by ship from Hamburg or Frankfurt, or I don't have the geography in my head right now, so don't quote me on this, but they went by ship to Southampton. Some also, in my film, you have a plane that went from Ruzhin Airport near Czechoslovakia, near Prague. That plane did go to London, and I know this because I was the first person to find that footage in the National Archives to use it, and I went. They had. This is my third reference to olden days technology, but they had actual card files with information. And there was a note that this was shot for Universal Newsreel, and it was never made into a newsreel. It was just outtakes. But the camera person was so worried about this plane full of children that he had the pilot call him when he landed safely in England to make sure that they were okay. And he wrote in the card file that the pilot did call him. And that footage, and especially the image of a gentleman in glasses holding a child, is now famous because it is Nicholas Winton. And I didn't know that. And it was when I was showing a work in progress of the film at a reunion of Kinder, which was Bertha Leverton's group reunion in Jerusalem, that Nicky and his wife, Greta, were at. And Greta came up to me afterwards and said, "That's Nicky, you know." And I had not known. Also, at that reunion, there's a scene of some archival footage of the children in one of these camps, summer camps, Dovercourt. And there was this hubbub in the audience. I was like, what's going on here? And this man came up to me afterwards and said, "I saw my best friend playing with a spoon." And I knew you can see the shot of a kid playing with a spoon in that footage. And I was so happy I saw my best friend. And then I realized that was my best friend at Dovercourt playing with a spoon. I'm sitting right next to him. And I turned my gaze and I saw myself. So moments like that are kind of amazing. But yes, the Kindertransports were, and then there were the Kindertransports to France. And there's just been a new book, Who Will Rescue Us, about the Kindertransports to France, which then went to the US because France became less and less safe. And some of the Kindertransport children stayed in the Netherlands, and they were very vulnerable because they were without family, and many of them were then deported to Westerbork and Auschwitz. Some Kindertransports to Sweden. Some Kindertransports to Sweden were organized by a Christian mission, and they also had a plane from Czechoslovakia to Sweden. There was the Barbican mission. The Krauses, someone has mentioned, who organized a group of 50 children from Vienna to the US. And then, so there were both. So to Britain was this sort of organized, Parliament agreed on a scheme where the children did not need visas. They just needed travel documents, because the idea was that they would be there temporarily after whatever. No one knew what the after would be. They would rejoin their parents, or they would go to Alaska, or they would go somewhere. That was the largest sort of official organization to the US, and there were in total around 1,000 children who went to the US. It was sort of piecemeal, taking advantage of visas that were left open, like of extra ones. There was a proposal, the Wagner-Rogers bill, by a Republican and a Democratic senator, who to bring in up to 20,000 children, and they didn't mention the word Jewish, but 20,000 refugee children to the US. That was thought up after the Kindertransports to Great Britain had been running successfully for 2 months. And people testified, child welfare experts testified, Mary Pickford and other silent film stars, and people testified all over, but it didn't even make it to a vote on the floor of Congress. It was killed in committee. It was before the US entered the war, so there was fear of getting involved, isolationism. There was this Father Coughlin, who was a very active anti-Semitic priest on the radio, and the US was getting out of the Depression and didn't want children who would be cute, but then would be ugly adult refugees taking jobs from Americans. when I say that now, it has such reverberations at this present moment. But so, yeah, there are a lot. Kindertransport can be looked at in many different ways right now. And it wasn't one big unified thing, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And some even, like, I organized a trip for the Kindertransport Association for the 85th year last year. And Ralph Samuel, a kind, went, and World Jewish Relief, which is the successor organization to the Committee for the Care of Children from Germany, has many of the records of the Kindertransport children in London. And they arranged to pull the original records for us and have us visit the Metropolitan Library. And Ralph had been wondering for many, many years, 80 plus years, how his mother, who came to Britain as a domestic, and this is something that isn't talked about, Britain actually had more adults, refugees, come as on domestic worker visas than Kindertransport children, but that's not as cute as children.
Mm-hmm.
But his mother came as a domestic, and he was always wondering how she got out, because he flew from Dresden to Croydon Airport, which is very unusual. And they found his mother's record, and that she also flew from Dresden to Croydon, and that meant so much for him to discover. So these many years later, people are still, both individuals and historians, are making all sorts of discoveries. Yeah.
Which is amazing. I mean, you know, and which quiets all the voices that say, you know, enough already. We know everything about the Holocaust. Let's move on. There is so much new research coming up, and of course, the relevance is amazing. So, how many children do you think went into Jewish families who came via Kindertransport? Like, was that a very low percentage, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, my father had an answer to that question, which I will not repeat. But it was low because the Jewish community in Britain was largely more Eastern European, not German or Austrian. And they were not wealthy. There was a concentration of them living in the East End of London. So the larger Jewish community didn't have the capacity or really the interest in helping these Central European Jewish children. However, Jewish families and organizations that had money were very generous, because in order for the children to come, they not only had to pay for the train ticket, and they also had to put a bond of £50 for each child to ensure that they wouldn't become a burden on the state. And this was a large amount of money then, and the Lord Baldwin Fund sort of held it, and it was then recycled. It wasn't exactly one £50 guarantee per child. But Ralph Samuel is here. I see in the chat. So there were more established, wealthier Jewish families who gave money to the Lord Baldwin Fund and supported the Kindertransports in other ways, and in some cases set up hostels and schools. The Sunday Bloody Sunday, Schlesinger, their director, John Schlesinger's parents took in 12 children who became known as the Schlesinger 12 from Berlin. So, and my mother, in addition to being sent to this Jewish family for holidays, she had correspondence class with a rabbi, which was more Jewish education than she ever had in Vienna. And also I want to say, I didn't say this before because I was trying to be discreet, but anyone who knows me knows that lasts only so long. The unpublished doctoral thesis that was available when I first started doing research concluded with the thought that though the Kindertransport saved the lives, and she's talking only about the Kindertransports to Great Britain, the United Kingdom, sorry. Though the Kindertransport saved the lives of nearly 10,000 children, their souls were lost to the Jewish people. And this is because she felt they weren't involved, they didn't have Jewish lives afterwards. And first, also, I just want to say, I didn't mention there was Rabbi Solomon Schoenfeld, who got out 1,000 Orthodox children. But nearly all of the Kindertransport children I have interviewed have some sort of Jewish identity. Jewish identity is broad. Jewish identity can be you're Orthodox, you are conservative, you are Reform, you are an atheist Jew, you are a humanist Jew. And I met a brother who became a priest, and his sister became a nun, but she was a nun in the Sisters of Zion. So identity can be, Jewish identity can be really broad, and that was super upsetting to me to read that.
Yeah, I can see that. I can hear that also. Yeah. So how this is a whole other conversation, I guess. But some of the parents of the Kinder survived, and did they speak about how the reunification, how that was to be reunified with their parents, whether they were reunified, like how these experiences went?
Yes, I have in the film Kurt Fuchsal, who was very lucky. He was with one family who he loved for 7 years. And then his parents, who had been hiding in France, and they met him in England, and his grandmother had been in Gibraltar. And he loved his foster family. He didn't know if he wanted, he was 6. So his parents had left this little boy, and then they reunited with this teenager, and he talked about he was going to meet them. He didn't know if he would even recognize them, and he saw them reflected in a store window, and he recognized them, but they spoke German and French, and he spoke only English, and his grandmother had to translate between them. So in many cases, it was very difficult because the parents had survived what they had survived and had been longing for and thinking of their little child, who was then a teenager. And everyone here, I'm sure, can remember that they were, I don't mean to speak for everyone, but perhaps were not the most evolved teenager. So those reunions could be really difficult. And in some cases, it was yet another uprooting, because if they were with a family that they loved and they'd been with for years, why would they have to go somewhere else? I do want to say that in another cranky moment, there's a play, Kindertransport, by Diane Samuels, that became one of the earliest widely known things about the Kindertransports. And that play portrays, it has its wonderful moments, but it portrays a Kindertransport survivor who not only her mother survived concentration camp and was going to America, and she refused to go with her, and then kept that part of her life hidden until her daughter discovered it. And for someone to not go to America with a parent who survived is infinitesimally rare. I even know of Kinder who went with a surviving parent back to Austria, which they really did not want to do, but to not go with a parent would have been an incredible step. And many people wanted to go to America, just not go to, yeah. So yes, there were a range of, even my mother got married the first time when she was 18, I think, in large part she was living with her parents and her aunts in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, in large part to get out on her own. So, yeah, the reunions could be difficult. Some could be really wonderful, and people were. Then I know some who were. I've had tea with, an 80-year-old kind and their 100-year-old mother, and it's just beautiful. I mean, these relationships. I feel really honored and privileged to have gotten to know so many of them. I did not know. It was my first film, so I didn't know how careful you have to be in choosing your first film, and that you can be accepted into a community. I mean, it's a personal film and it comes from my life, but also I was so accepted into the Kindertransport community in a really beautiful way. And I still have long-term relationships with Kinder and the second and the third generations that are really beautiful and I really value. And little did I know when I was making this film that so many years later I would still be in this world.
Yeah, and I'm very, and I think I share that with all our listeners, that we're very thankful to you that you share, that you share all that information that you collected with us, and that journey that you yourself experienced. And I hope you continue doing that. But we're very much going over time, and I know I have to ignore quite a few questions. But I wanted to ask you, what is the film that you are working on now? Like, do you stay in the kinder world, or like what is your next project now?
So I was trying to answer a question and it won't let me type because I pressed the wrong thing. Someone who says he knew my mother through Arthur Cohen, and yes, I remember Arthur Cohen very well. I love this old school aspect of these things. And really, if anyone wants to get in touch, Melissa@kindertransport.org. So my new film is, and there's a wonderful filmmaker who was a big influence on me, Alan Berliner, but he makes films about his family, and I thought at first, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be known as the person making films about my family and the Holocaust, which does sound like a bad joke when I say it like that, my family and the Holocaust, but sorry. And it's such a hard subject. It was really hard to make. My knees were jumping. It was really sad. It was a lot. And so I thought I would work on other things. And as an editor, I've been privileged to work on all kinds of films, on all different subjects. But I got a letter from the Austrian National Library that said, we found some of your grandfather's diaries and books, and if you can prove to us who you are, we will send them to you. And while I was waiting for a lawyer to write a letter to say who I am, I asked them if they knew anything at the library about his collection of ex libris, which are book plates. In the front cover of a book, you can sometimes see a small piece of graphic art that says this book is from the collection of so-and-so. And I knew my grandfather had a collection of that. And they sent me a stack of papers, and one of them was a letter from the director, the Nazi-installed director in 1939 of the Austrian National Library, saying, the Jew Marco Birnholz, it was a letter to Adolf Eichmann, saying the Jew Marco Birnholz has put together an extraordinary collection of ex libris. He is trying to flee. If he leaves with this collection, it could fall into the hands of foreign Jews, ! And I said to myself, oh no, this is a film. And so I am now making a film, and I'm using animation. Because the ex libris themselves that he commissioned, now not normally, with collectors, nothing is normally, but you might need one ex libris for your fiction, one ex libris for he was a pharmacist, for your pharmaceutical medical collection. He commissioned over 200 ex libris from artists of the day. And he was known, it turns out, for commissioning from more starting artists, impoverished artists, to try to help them. And also from Finkelstein and other artists. This was Vienna in between the wars, an incredible artistic time. And this is, I've learned, as Rachel mentioned, I had a Fulbright, so I lived in the Museumsquartier in Vienna and did research there. The Ex Libris Society was mixed race, mixed religion, mixed economic, and they would meet together and say, oh, you have an ex libris of hiking in the mountains. I have one by this artist of hiking in the mountains. Can we trade like baseball cards? So it was this incredibly interactive, rich society that doesn't exist anymore. It's an art form. As we wonder about the fate of the book, where do ex libris fit in all of this? But my grandfather also kept diaries, which I got from the Austrian National Library. And so the film is a telling of his life and his ex libris collection. And the ex libris are so beautiful that I'm animating them. I have a little early trailer on a website, which is, I don't think I can send a message to everyone. I think Rachel has to do that for me, but it's exlibrismovie.com. And of course, donations are necessary to fund this because I cannot animate. I did some early tests. And while I was really excited when I was at an artist's residency, I was running around saying, I did puppeting, because I made the arms on an image move. It's actually much more effective and beautiful if a real animator does it. And so I have to raise money for that. But I hope to finish it by the end of 2026. And its working title is Ex Libris, Life in Book Plates. And yeah, that's the film I'm working on, which I've been, reading his diaries for some time, and for those of you who are working on family history, he wrote in a handwriting that's sort of between Altdeutsch or Sutherland and modern German. So first I had to get it translated into modern German. And then, because my mother was someone who said, I don't want in New York my children speaking German because that's a language that caused me so much pain, although she did speak it with her mother, but that's her prerogative. So I never learned German. So it's been this years of multiple translation and these tiny, tiny journals he kept when he was a prisoner of war in Siberia. So I apologize for the long answer, but this is the film I'm working on now, so I can talk about it extensively.
Fabulous, fabulous. Something very much to look forward to. So someone asked Melissa, and I want this, I think we conclude our event with that. Someone asked, what question would you like to be asked? That we didn't ask, maybe.
I'm trying to think. It's interesting, I get asked a lot about the subject and not so much about the filmmaking choices. So maybe, so I'm trying to think of a what, and because I'm primarily an editor, it's maybe how did you shape all of these memories and history? How does one shape all of these memories and history into a film that isn't just telling your family story, but is something that has a wider reach? Because, and this is something I have to say, and maybe I can answer a little bit, which I think when I first started working on it, it was a little bit there were things I knew I wanted to do, and I wanted to tell this history, but also I was working alone after the filming, I was working alone in a small dark room, editing, trying to put it together. And it didn't really occur to me that I would actually show it to people. And I think, and the first time I did it was a shock. And so I think it's really important, especially when making a personal film, to know that it's not only about you. And I battled, one of the choices I had to make was how much to put myself in the film. And luckily, build a creative community around yourself, because I had an editor I worked for as an assistant for a long time who I'd invite to come screen the works in progress. And at a certain point, she said, where are you? I want to see more of you in the film. And then Helen Epstein, who gave me this personal realization when I was a teenager, she was a friend of my father's, I think. And so I was able to write her. And again, my fourth note on olden days technology, I sent her a VHS of a work in progress. And one of her comments was, oh, and of course, I know you've already planned to put this scene near the end. And I had not. And then when I did it, I was like, yes, and of course, you are right. So I owe her for that too. So yeah, maybe sometimes it's fun to have questions not only about the content, but also about the making of the film.
That's a very good point. But also something that if you're not involved in that process, I think I didn't have an idea of the many choices that you have, like this vast, of course, when you write or when you organize a talk, like you also make choices, of course, what to ask and what to touch. But in the filmmaking, I think yes, of course, it's amazing. And I was wondering myself, did your mother maybe by being interviewed by you open up more, tell more about her story than she would have sitting on the living room couch with you, in order, or at the dinner table, or whatever the private setting might be.
Yes, I mean, it was only because, so I had, as I sort of alluded to, that I had dropped out of, I'd left college or dropped out of college, gone back, waited tables, worked in daycare, and gone back and fell in love with film and with editing. So my mother was really happy that I had found possibly a career. So something that I was passionate about. And she was proud that I was interested in Jewish history and in this part of Jewish history and in her life. So it was these sort of outside things that made her open up. I don't think if there wasn't the film between us as a thing, I don't think I would have thought to ask. And I feel really lucky because she did die so young, to have had the chance to ask her questions, and that because of this film, that she was open to talking to me. It really was those things were what made her want to speak to me. And yes, just in terms of choices, I've worked on films as an editor where there are 300 hours of footage for a 90-minute project. This because I was filming on film. I had a thing with my camera person where I would squeeze them on the arm once to start filming and do like this to stop, and the sound would always be running. So I think my ratio was 40 or 45 to 1, but still that is a lot. And oldie technology again, I was working on what's called a flatbed. I filmed in 16 millimeter film, and I was editing in 16 millimeter film. So I was working with reels of actual film and with a splicer that I would cut the film and glue it together. So every time you made another cut, there'd be a little jump because taping it together didn't make it exactly right. So you wanted to really think before you made edits. I mean, I'm very happy that before working on computer editing systems, which I do now, I did have the chance to work in film because it really helps you to make choices and consider them. And also when you're looking for something, you have to look at all the other footage, like, because each reel is 12 minutes, I think. So you would scroll fast through and then you would see things. Whereas in a computer, you can call up the exact frame you want to see. It takes some of the serendipity, some of the chance to see something that you wouldn't have noticed or discarded before. So I always try to build in serendipity and chance when I work.
Mm-hmm. That is fascinating. And I wish you really much luck in your work, in your maybe you find a little additional funding for your new film through this conversation, and I feel you will also, of course, get the chat record, so you can have all these conversations that we can't have in this context anymore. But thank you so much for your openness, for sharing your really important work, and good luck on your next projects, and thank you so much for taking so much time to talk to us.
Having me in. thank you all for staying past, wow, well past our time. It's really
Yes.
beautiful. I appreciate it. And
Thank you so much, Melissa. All the
thank
best
you,
to
Rachel.
everyone.
All right. Bye.
Bye.